Hi, it's Stan Phelps. I hope you've had an amazing leadership summit. It's my honor to be the closing keynote. And I want to take you back to my experience. My home chapter is the AMA Triangle back all the way back in 2013. I became a volunteer for our chapter. And as often happens, I got a little more involved. And in 2014, I went to regional retreat in Richmond. And I tell you, I got hooked. And it wasn't soon after regional retreat that January of 14 that I agreed to become the president elect for the following year. And I remembered end of April, beginning of May rolled around. And in 2014, I went to my very first leadership summit in Chicago. Now, I'd heard a lot of things from some of the other chapter leaders in the Triangle about Summit. I was a little wary when I walked in the room. In fact, I'll never forget it because there were three things that really popped out to me as I walked into that room. One was how bad the old logo looked. We used to call it the wishbone logo or the spider logo. Shout out to Russ Klein for fixing the logo soup and especially taking care of that horrible logo. The second thing I noticed was the presenting team. And specifically for the presenting team, just like how hyped up, excited they were, like over the top. And I was thinking, whoa, what Kool-Aid are these kids on? Are they way too caffeinated or what? But I tell you what, by Saturday and Sunday of that weekend, I was kind of in the flow and in the spirit, and they really set a good tone for the entire conference that Friday morning. And the last thing that I noticed was all of the banners that were on the back wall. And Triangle, my chapter, had been around since 1981, so 33 years at that point. And I looked at all of the Chapter of the Year award winners, and Triangle was nowhere to be found. So it came out. But one of the great things, and I imagine even this being virtual, that you've learned from Summit is all of the amazing people from around the country, the other chapter leaders that you get to meet and network and learn from. And that was no exception for me. That 2014, I reconnected with some people I knew. I met a ton of new people. And it turns out, because I'm a speaker and I travel around the country, that 2 months later, I happened to be in Jacksonville, Florida. And so I did one of my very first chapter events for, at the time, they used to call themselves JAMA, for Jacksonville AMA. And it was a great experience, and it started kind of the ball rolling of speaking at different chapters. Now, I'm very much a goal-driven guy. 2014, 2015, I'm speaking for more chapters. In 2016, I said, right, my goal is to speak at every chapter in the country. So as I travel around, I would connect with a chapter, see if I could come and speak. In some instances, I would come and speak at conferences and other events. And I created this thing that I put on my wall. And I've got it right here. I look at it almost every day when I'm sitting at my desk. And to date, I've done 55 of the 70 plus chapters. To steal a line from Johnny Cash, I've been everywhere, man. But I've been everywhere, man, but these remaining chapters, really quick: Chicago, Omaha, Columbia, Orlando, both Connecticut chapters, Northeast Ohio, Dallas, Utah, Albuquerque, the OC, Sacramento, Atlanta, Toronto, and PDX. My goal is by the end of 2020 to have spoken at every chapter. A couple weeks ago, I did the Capital Region in New York. We did that as a virtual program. So hit me up. Do me a favor in the chat if you've seen me speak before. Don't sugarcoat it. Was I good? Was I okay? Was I great? Let the other chapters know. Do me a favor. All right. What's interesting to me as I began this journey as a chapter leader back in 2014, and I was on that track for the next 3.5 years, president-elect, president, and past president, it turned out that 3 of my next 4 books would focus on the idea of employee or team member engagement. And so that was a big thing for me. The green goldfish, the red goldfish, and the golden goldfish really was based on a revelation that I had not only as a leader, but by studying successful companies. And it turns out, this is just a fact, is that you can't have happy, enthused customers, or in our case, members, unless you have happy, engaged board members and volunteers. And so that's super important. Before we start focusing all of our attention on the members, let's make sure that we get it right and that we get our board members and volunteers engaged. Now, why does it pay off to do this? Well, the research clearly shows that if you have an engaged team, you're going to grow 3 times faster than other chapters or other companies that don't have engaged employees. And here's the thing, your turnover goes way down and your productivity goes up. So it's a no-brainer. You want to make sure that you have that level of engagement. And so through my research, it turns out that there's 75 different ways that you can do this. Now, in my book, Green Goldfish, I talk about kind of the top 15 ways. But if we had to boil it down and go, well, if I just did one thing, what would the number one thing be in terms of driving engagement? And the number one thing is the extent to which your board members and board members and volunteers believe that leaders have a sincere interest in their well-being. So how do you do the little things to show that you're caring, that they're aware of how the decisions are being made for the chapter, and they feel like you're making decisions on their behalf in their best interest? Now, there's a great theory. It's not mine. It's written by a guy by the name of Vineet Nayar. Vineet used to be the CEO of HCL Technologies. And he calls this theory the theory of the Amsterdam window. Now, in a former life, I used to live in Amsterdam back in my days of brand marketing with Adidas. And I used to live in one of these canal houses. And what's amazing about these canal houses is that almost none of them have any types of shades or curtains. I mean, it's just wide open for the world to look in that canal house. And so Vineet told a story about visiting a friend of his who lived in one of these canal houses, and he asked him, why don't you have any shades or curtains? And his friend told him a couple of really obvious answers. And he said, well, we don't get the sun much here in Amsterdam, so it's nice to be able to let the sun come in. And of course, we like to have the nice views of the canal, the beautiful views. But Vineet said then his friend said something really interesting. He said, it also forces us to keep our house clean and organized. And so it's this idea of how do you create that openness or transparency as a leader? Again, knowing why, for your board members and volunteers, why you're doing the things that you're doing. And so Vineet talks about this idea of opening up what he calls the window of information. And to steal a quote from William Brandeis, let that sunlight in, keep it as open as possible, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. So if that's this idea of creating that level of transparency is what I would call a building block and a foundational element as a leader, what's another main thing that you have to do in terms of creating that foundation? And we look at this as kind of like a pyramid, or this base or foundation of the pyramid. The other thing that we want to be thinking about as we build our teams is, how do we handle onboarding within the chapter? Specifically, how do we make sure our new VPs get off to a great start? How do we make sure that our president-elect feels like they're involved and they're learning? And so this idea of onboarding is absolutely key. How do you manage that transition in July and August is going to be absolutely critical as a leader. So there's a great company. They're a leader in both customer experience and employee engagement. They're based out of San Antonio. It's USAA. And they do something really interesting in terms of onboarding. They take it really serious at USAA. In fact, at USAA, whether you're C-level all the way down to a janitor, all go through a 3-week boot camp that they put on. And during that time, 3 full weeks, you're not only trying on military fatigues, but you're reading letters from members of the military and their family. Some of your lunches are even MREs, meals ready to eat. And they're trying to indoctrinate you to know what it's like to be a member of the military or a family member. And so that's a great example of that critical first few weeks or 2 months. You want to make sure that you're probably having a lot more one-on-ones with your VPs. Maybe you're sitting in on some of the meetings that they have with their team. Maybe you're even spending a little time at those critical first few events that you're ushering and getting them off to a great start. Now, if that's the transparency and the onboarding is that foundation, let's talk about the next level of this pyramid. And these are the things that you do to create a sense of belonging and to make those volunteers and board members feel like they're part of something and they're part of this greater team. And so the 2 things I want to talk about here are recognition and team building. Recognition is absolutely key. I want to start there and tell you the story of this guy right here. His name is Doug Conan. And back in the 2000s, Doug took over to be the CEO of the Campbell Soup Company. Now, at the time when they brought Doug in, the stock was in the tank, morale and the culture was in shambles, and the company just wasn't innovating, and they weren't as profitable and productive as they could be. And Doug set out to do a lot of little things to be able to change the culture and to reinforce kind of a new vision at Campbell's. And so he did a lot of little fun things. One of the things he used to do is he would take his shoes off every afternoon and put on walking shoes and then walk about 10,000 steps around the company headquarters at Campbell's and just drop in and connect with people. But there's one other thing that he did that I think was brilliant from a recognition point of view. Every day, Doug would sit down with his assistants and he would write anywhere between 7 to maybe 10 or 12 handwritten notes, going out of his way to recognize team members and the little things that they had done to contribute to the company. And what was amazing back in the 2000s, about only half of the Campbell's workforce had access to a company email address. So actually doing these handwritten notes was an effective way to reach the entire organization. Over the course of Doug's near decade of being CEO at Campbell's, he wrote over 30,000 handwritten notes. So as an incoming president, do me a favor, take time, whether it's an email, whether it's maybe a little video that you send to a team member, or even a handwritten note to recognize that behavior. Because recognition really comes down to just 2 words. And I love this. Fellow speaker Angela Meyer boils this down. She said, recognition is just about 2 words. Those 2 words, you matter. Again, reaching out to your team and making them feel like they're part of it, that you're recognizing their contribution, absolutely key. Now, here's the challenge that we have. I think that most of us have been trained to look at recognition the wrong way. We've always been taught, well, if this, then that. If a board member or volunteers does X, then they get Y. And I think that's the wrong approach to being a leader today. We want to quickly be able to seek out and recognize the behavior that we want. Because done correctly, recognition can actually fuel the performance that you want. So you want to recognize early and often. Now here's the thing, it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be this long drawn out process. You can do actually a lot of just very simple things to reinforce and recognize the contributions of your team members. So this is a fun example. This is a Danish software company called Valtech. They have this little, what did it cost them, maybe $15, this little purple elephant. And they have an award called the Order of the Elephant. And each week a different team member gets awarded the purple elephant. And if a team member exhibits positivity, which is one of the core values at Valtech, they get awarded that purple elephant, which they get to place on their desk. And just a small little thing that they do, which is really cool. Here's the thing. I'm going to give you a great idea here in a second. But first, I want you to write in the chat, especially for my presidents-to-be, who has their theme or their rallying cry for 2020, 2021 already figured out, or have a working rallying cry. Do me a favor, type that in the comments. I'm going to give you a second and show you something. This is so cool. By the way, I mentioned I spoke at the Jacksonville chapter. A few weeks later, I got this in the mail. The idea of building bricks was their theme. So this was their speaker gift, a hand-painted July 14 JAMA, and I'm not sure why they had their URL on there. By the way, that was a cool gift. I just most recently spoke at the Charlotte chapter back in early March. They gave me this cool thing. I've gotten my fair share of coffee mugs. I love this. This is a little phone stand that you can put on your desk. So I love that. That's good stuff. All right, so you've maybe typed that rallying cry. Here's the idea I want you to think about. So this combines recognition with that vision. Here's the idea. How do you create an object that you can pass around at your board meetings that ties into your theme or rallying cry, and allows you the opportunity each meeting to call that out. So this is a great example from former National Volunteer of the Year, Evan Carroll. Now, Evan Carroll happened to be in the UNC band, so music was really important to him. And so he created what was called the Drumbeat Award. And so if you got it as a board member, your task was to write a quote. It was an actual drum. You would write a quote on it. And then when the next board meeting came around, your job was to share the quote with everyone. And then as Evan, as president, would award it to someone else on the team. So over the course of the year, almost everyone got the Drumbeat Award. So great example. So that's recognition. Here's number 4. I want you to think about team building. So how do you create opportunities for your team to come together? This is a real fun example from a company in Virginia. They're called Snag-a-Job. And each year, I love this, they have what's called the Office Olympics. So they split the company up into different countries, and then they have all sorts of fun Office Olympic activities. This right here is office chair curling, which I'm not sure about the liability with that, but it looks fun. Here's another idea for you, especially presidents and president-elects. Within the next 2 months, you're probably going to be putting together some type of strategic planning session. And so how can you figure out either activities or a place that you could go that would allow for your board members to bond a little bit socially, have a little bit of fun together, and build up that dynamic? This is a great example. A few years ago, I was out in Alaska, and I had a chance to facilitate the AMA Alaska Strategic Planning Weekend. And we went to this great resort outside of Anchorage called Alyeska. And it was just an amazing time with hiking and working. It was just dinners, fires, hot tub, the whole nine. It was great. All right, so number 5, we're going to get all the way to the top of the pyramid. At the top here are the things that you do to create a sense of becoming. So how do you do little things to help your team members become a greater version of themselves? How do you give them opportunities to be leaders? How can they own certain things that they feel that they can grow and develop? And so the example here in empowerment I want to share is from 3M. 3M's been around for forever. What's interesting, the first 3 decades of 3M's existence, they were a poor performing company. They struggled. They were in the red for the most part. It wasn't until after World War II that they changed a couple of their policies. And one of the little things that they did was institute what was called 15% time. And the idea is an engineer at 3M, you could pick up to 15% of your time to work on a personal project of your choosing. And so that ability and freedom to be able to develop something is where some of their greatest innovations have come from. So that's where the Post-it note came from. Google one-upped 3M. They've now created what's called 20% time. That's where innovations like Gmail has come from. So think about it for you as a chapter leader. How do you give volunteers and your board members ownership, right? Allow them the ownership and control to help develop and grow things. And I think the challenge that we have as leaders is that many times we've been through that position or we've seen that thing happen before. The tendency is maybe to jump in and try to fix or to help out. Here's the thing. I want you to actually step back, empower your team to actually grow themselves And here's the mantra I want to give you that's going to help you. This is the mantra. Repeat after me. 70% perfect, 100% done. Right? Don't feel like everything has to be perfect. Perfection is the enemy of progress. Right? Step back. Here's the thing. At the beginning, it might be a little slower going. And I love this African proverb that Danny Rosen, one of the board members on my team, shared with me. He said, Stan, if you want to go fast, go alone. But he said, if you want to go far, he said, go together. And so I want to end today kind of where I started. So this is my 7th leadership summit. I talked about the 2014 summit. I went to the 2017 summit, and fortunately, the Triangle chapter had really succeeded that previous year. So we had this really strong rallying cry that we called the One Louder. In terms of transparency and openness, as a president, every Saturday, I would write an email to every board member and volunteer sharing what I called 11 quick things to reinforce the idea of going to 11. Little things, just recognizing accomplishments of the team members, talking about performance, recapping events, social things that we would share, maybe a joke or a story as a little something extra. And then lastly, we created an award. And it was one of these little mini amplifiers, battery operated, but you could actually plug into it. And each board meeting, we would give the One Louder award to people on the team. And it was one of the most satisfying experiences for me as a leader, having worked with our team. I remember submitting the CEA, which I still have a very proud copy of right here, documenting that year. And I would recommend, this is something you're doing for chapter leaders of the future, definitely put in your CEA. And what was really cool, in 2017, Triangle was awarded the Gold Chapter of the Year. The first time we were the lone Gold Chapter of the Year winner. So with that, I'm going to finish up with a little something extra. I tell people I can't talk about the little extra without doing it. So here's the thing. If you go on Amazon today, I've made 2 of the books in the series that I think are relevant here. The first is The Green Goldfish, which is the 15 ways that you can drive engagement and reinforce culture. So it's the Green Goldfish 2.0 that's available today. And then the second is the Pink Goldfish, which is more about the marketing, but it's the ability to understand that we all are unique, and the idea that every weakness has corresponding strength, and that what makes us weird is actually what makes us wonderful. So as you've come to the end of 2 days, I want to thank you for being part of Summit. In a second, we're going to open it up to questions and comments, but it's been my pleasure being here. I really hope that you embrace the idea of being open, being transparent, and onboarding your board members and volunteers, that you recognize them early and often, that you do the little things to build that environment of a team, and lastly, that you empower and let go and let your team take you to places that you couldn't go by yourself. With that, I want to open it up to questions and comments.